Hello everybody. I thought I would give you a little video before the week gets started. I just watched HBO's documentary, Woodstock 99, Peace, Love, and Rage. A documentary about the Woodstock 1999 music festival, largely sort of focused on processing why the festival culminated in the riots during the Red Hot Chili Peppers set, where a large portion of the festival was burned down. Looking at the culminating events, trying to explain why it happened. And I think, overall it was an okay film. I think as a music fan, oftentimes you watch these documentaries mostly as primary sources to get the footage and see behind the scenes. And for that reason alone, it was definitely interesting. I was 9 years old when Woodstock 99 happened. I was just starting to get into punk and metal music. The Offspring played at Woodstock 99, of course, and you do get to see them in this documentary. The Offspring was pretty much the first punk band I got into through my dad. There's all sorts of different perspectives here. Mostly the three sorts of perspectives you get are journalists, musicians who played at the festival, and the festival organizers. And I think the biggest sort of detriment to the film is that it has this very kind of centrist, liberal, let's hear all sides of the story kind of attitude. And it gives voice to everybody. And sometimes that works, where it's the actual picture of things is clear enough that when you hear someone just spouting bullshit, it becomes useful not because you're getting their perspective to consider their perspective as a legitimate perspective, but to see, oh wow, this person is a frickin' idiot. The only person I think that's really true for in this documentary is, I believe his name's Bill Scher, one of the organizers of the festival. What I had always heard growing up from 1999 onward, and especially from a lot of music fans, we were still talking about Woodstock 99 when I first started going to shows. My first metal show was in 2002. Or 2003, I forget, sometime around then. And in a bar in Newport News, seeing a death metal band whose name I unfortunately don't remember. But, people were still talking at that time about Woodstock 99 as a sort of a cautionary tale, mostly of show management and show organization. And I think it's probably going to be hard to watch this documentary for most people and not come away with it at least partially blaming show management for what happened, particularly because of the attitude of Bill Scher, who basically acts like nothing bad actually happened, blaming it all, anything bad that happened on Limp Bizkit. He very casually says, oh, there were only 10 cases of sexual assault prosecuted following the festival, which, if you know anything about sexual assault, the vast majority of instances are never reported. So if there were 10 that were prosecuted, that means that there was a disgusting amount of sexual assault at that festival. And he also blames it on the women themselves for being naked, a thing that him and other show organizers actively encouraged. And one of the frustrating things is that there is a lot of back and forth in the documentary about how much things can be blamed on the fans and on the musical culture, including the bands that were playing. There's a big focus on nu metal, of course, because nu metal was up and coming. Nu metal really broke out in 1997. That's when it really started to become popular. So this is 1999. Limp Bizkit had really established itself as like the, most popular metal band at the time. And they played. Kid Rock also played. And, particularly when they're covering Kid Rock's set, there's a lot of discussion. And the two most annoying people in the documentary are Moby, which is not surprising. He's an incredibly annoying, pretentious, whiny musician. Pretty much everything you could hate in a musician, both musically and in the way that he talks about other music that he doesn't participate in. It's hilarious to see him, looking down on nu metal and nu metal fans when he plays frickin' techno music, which is, not exact. Techno music doesn't exactly have a reputation for being diverse, for being women friendly. And, that's the sort of thing is the thing that is pretty much never touched on except by a couple of people. Shout outs to Korn. Korn has some insightful things to say in the movie. Maureen from Spin Magazine has a lot of insightful things to say. And then I believe his name is Steve Hyden, who's another music journalist, has some interesting things to say. But, there's a journalist from the New York Times. He's my other, most annoying person. And they just make these broad, sweeping generalizations about nu metal, and about the people who attended Woodstock 99. They really show a huge amount of ignorance about both nu metal and about Woodstock 99. Class, as in socioeconomic class, is very rarely talked about in this documentary as compared to race and gender. And when class is talked about, there is this completely unfounded assumption that all of the people at this festival were wealthy college fraternity bros. And obviously, if you go through the footage, you can see the wealthy college fraternity bros there. But, to say that all of the fans there were just a bunch of wealthy white guys is just absolutely untrue. And it's particularly untrue to categorize the sort of the fan base of nu metal in particular as being that. There's this odd sort of sense, especially in retrospect, from these idiots, again, like this New York Times journalist and Moby, who clearly just don't understand anything about it, this sort of gloss of thinking of nu metal as, this thing that, these wealthy, entitled white people were really into. And, it's crazy, they're talking about this largely during Kid Rock's scene. Kid Rock is obviously a super easy target because of who he has become as a public figure, his connections to Donald Trump, obviously. But it shows they don't even know the history of Kid Rock. I mean, Kid Rock came up in the Detroit hip-hop scene. He wasn't, someone who was ignorant of hip-hop. To the contrary, he when he started out was just a straight hip-hop musician, just straightforward Detroit style rapping, and it was only when he realized that no one really wants to hear a white guy, just doing a literally pale imitation of hip hop, that he started to create his own style, blending southern rock, metal, and hip hop. And they keep doing close-ups during his set of his drummer, who happens to be a black woman, which I thought was very interesting. There was a really sort of weird judgment in the use of that footage. Like, almost like, well, why were you doing this? Why were you betraying your people? And, obviously Kid Rock is an idiot. I'm not trying to defend Kid Rock here at all. They show the particularly idiotic footage of him, saying that Monica Lewinsky was a whore and Bill Clinton was a pimp, which just, that speaks for itself. But, the idea that, like, nu metal was this music of the upper class is insane. It's an insane assertion. Nu metal was so popular because it really sort of addressed a working class white audience. I think that's 100% true. Especially when you're talking about bands like Korn, who were really addressing, disaffected people. And, you also have bands like System of a Down, who certainly were not reactionaries, were not frat boys, who were, far to the left of the vast majority of the whiny, shitty liberal musicians who played at that festival, like Moby. I'm really going to beat up on Moby. I really do not like Moby. There is this general feeling with a lot of the people who they talk to in this documentary, and thus it's kind of hard not to impart it at least a little bit on the documentary filmmakers, of this sort of sneering attitude at metal fans in particular, and this notion, at least in part, like, oh yeah, sure, the show organizers screwed up, but it was also just this, white working class, misogynistic, violent, racist, blah, 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 blah. And, I think it sort of plays into all of the problems with that kind of reductive analysis that just evades any sort of idea of class. They sort of get into it at the end, in terms of the riots, people like Maureen saying, like, pointing out, like, hey, they set a Mercedes-Benz on fire, and, showing footage of, graffiti, that says, like, profit stock, you are the product, stuff like that. And of course, during Rage Against the Machine set, they had a montage of protest and so forth, which having pictures of the Women's March during Rage Against the Machine set was interesting. Again, it just shows that there's definitely a gap here in how much they understood metal as a genre and the bands who they were covering. I mean, I think it's noteworthy that, Zach De La Rocha and Tom Morello were not in this documentary, and neither of them are very shy about sharing their views. So I would guess that if they were approached, they may have said no once they got a sense of where this was going, and that they were going to, at least in part, sort of put blame on the fans, people who were systematically, deprived of water and food, kept out in completely inhumane conditions for 3 days. This wasn't a fire festival. I was really shocked, given the way that they were trying to portray it, that they didn't bring up Fire Festival. And I think it's probably in part because if they did bring up Fire Festival, the whole idea that this was a bunch of privileged people doing this would kind of fall apart. The difference between Fire Festival and Woodstock 99, the difference in the audiences is clearly apparent just looking at it. I mean, when you look at Woodstock 99, it is, I would say, like 50%, shitty music festival audience, the sort of audience you would expect to see at Coachella or Lollapalooza or anything like that, South by Southwest. Bunch of rich fucking suburban kids who suck. But it was also 50% like the people you would expect to see at an Insane Clown Posse show, sort of schlubby, Midwestern white guys, kids who, are wearing just plain white shirts and shitty cargo shorts. There were jokes in the documentary about guys wearing cargo shorts, and they were saying it as if, like, people who wore cargo shorts were, like, in the upper class. And, like, I went to a private high school. That was not the uniform of the wealthy people, cargo shorts. I mean, it's silly. And, again, overall, I did like this movie just because you get to see behind the scenes, you get to see things that happened. And I think it did do a good job of pointing out just how awful the sexual violence was at the concert. And it does a fairly good job of showing how much of it was the organizers' fault. The documentary ends talking about Coachella, which came soon after, and the differences between Coachella and Woodstock 99, and how, Coachella essentially did all of these things to they basically just managed it a lot better, and how much of a difference that made. But then there was also this sense, and you heard people talking about, like, ooh, that audience in Woodstock 99. And you get the sense that, like, this is, like, this sort of very classist idea of, like, oh, well, the good people, the good people go to Coachella. The good people go to Lollapalooza. They behave themselves, they have manners, unlike those schlubby, Insane Clown Posse fans. So yeah, that's just my off-the-cuff reactions. I'll just sum it up by saying, yeah, Moby is the most annoying person in the world. If they cut him out of this movie entirely, it would be so much better. But hey, that's how it is.